Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in for another presentation as part of the GreyLearning Live webinar series. Today, by actually popular request, a focus on develop presets in Lightroom Classic. It's a topic that I've addressed a little bit in my Ask Tim Grey email newsletters, and it's also a topic that I've covered, to some extent at least, in Pixology magazine, for those of you who are signed up for that. And so I wanted to go a little bit more in depth with a webinar presentation to give you a better sense of some of the possibilities in Lightroom Classic. For those of you who are, well, actually, let's see, did I get a little ahead of myself? I did here with the presentation. For those of you not familiar, I'm Tim Grey, as I suppose many of you already knew. I've been publishing the Ask Tim Grey email newsletter now for over 20 years. I know many of you receive that. I've seen some of the comments here from folks all over the world who are tuning in. I saw Seville, Spain, which is a beautiful spot, and a variety of other places around the country, etc. And I also produce a variety of video training courses through my GreyLearning website, which I'm sure many of you take a look at. And speaking of which, as part of today's webinar presentation, I've actually put together some of my favorite presets that I use in the Develop module in Lightroom Classic. So some of the presets that I'll actually essentially be talking about today, at least in the context of the types of presets that I use. And those I now have created a little course for essentially in the GreyLearning library. So if you already have the GreyLearning Ultimate bundle, or if you have the Mastering Lightroom Classic bundle, either of those two bundles do include the presets automatically. So you could actually follow this link here, timgrey.me/presets will take you to the page. You can sign in if you're not already signed in, and then you'd be able to resume the course, as the button will indicate, which will give you access to the course. And of course, if you're not already a subscriber, you could certainly buy the presets standalone. You get a better sense of some of those as I'm presenting later today. And if you want to really understand more about Lightroom Classic, I also encourage you to take a look at my Lightroom Lectures course. It's included, of course, in the GreyLearning Ultimate bundle, which includes all of the courses, as well as the Mastering Lightroom Classic bundle, which you can find right here, timgrey.me/LR bundle. And that will take you directly to the bundle itself. And now, without any further ado, let's talk about Lightroom Classic. We're going to dive in to Lightroom Classic, take a look at the Develop module, and so we'll bring up my screen here so that we can take a close look, essentially, at presets, which are sort of mostly about the Develop module, but they're not exclusively about the Develop module, as we'll see in just a moment. And first and foremost, I think it's important to understand what exactly is a Develop preset. And a Develop preset really is just a way of saving settings for adjustments. So let's take a quick look at a very basic example here. Let's assume, for example, that I wanted to convert this image to black and white, and so I might convert it to black and white. Maybe I would boost clarity, and in fact, let me just go add a bit of a strong color here just for the sake of creating an effect that's obvious. Well, I can preserve whatever things I've done over on the right panel with a preset so that I could quickly get to this point. Well, okay, this is not a point for an image that I really need to get to again, I don't think. A rather odd effect that I've just created, an exaggerated effect just to illustrate the concept here. But I could take this set of adjustments and I could create a preset. I could save all of my adjustment settings so that in the future, when I say to myself, hey, I think I'd like to get that weird magenta look for another image, I could easily apply the exact same effect very easily to another photo. And so it's obviously a little bit of a shortcut, you might say. It's a way to help streamline your workflow. If you're like me, you forget what settings you might have used for certain adjustments, and you just need a way to kind of remember what that starting point was, or what value you use for a sepia tone effect, for example. They can provide a variety of benefits. And there's also some other workflow advantages, as we'll see a little bit later, in the context of being able to batch apply essentially a single preset to multiple photos. This can be a really tremendous benefit in your workflow. And so let's go ahead and explore some of these Develop presets. I'm going to start off, in fact, I'll go into a collection where I have some images that we'll use as samples. And for the moment, I'll go ahead actually and hide my face so that you can see more of those controls over on the right panel. So I'm not hiding any of that from your view. And so here again, we have an image, and we'll just start off with a fairly basic concept here. I'm starting from scratch, and when I'm creating develop presets, by the way, I typically like to start from scratch for an image, meaning I'll often reset the image to the default settings, which in this case makes the image a little bit darker than it should be, etc. But this enables me to just have a really baseline starting point for a preset that I might create. And so in this case, I'll use the example of applying similar settings to another image. And once again, I'll sort of exaggerate some of these adjustments so that it's more obvious the actual effect of what's going on in the background. So don't imagine that I think that some of these adjustments are fantastic. I'm going to intentionally exaggerate them a bit so that you can get a better sense of the workflow, the process that's involved here. And I'll do that in a couple of situations, just to make some of these tasks a little bit easier to understand. So I might, for example, set my treatment option to black and white, and then I could apply various adjustments. Obviously, in this case, the image needs to be brightened a little bit, but that probably wouldn't need to be part of the actual preset in this case. And I could then apply whatever adjustments I'd like. So in essence, I can just work on the image and maybe, boost the clarity and maybe a little bit of dehaze to add some contrast there as well. Maybe I would add a little bit of texture in this case too, since it's kind of a little bit of a gritty image. And I could come down, here I'm obviously just kind of applying general adjustments, converting to black and white. Maybe I'll go into the color grading section and I could apply a little bit of a color tint. So I'll make something of a bit of a strong, well, let's make it very strong just so it's easier to see, sepia tone type of effect. And I'll balance that purely to the shadows, make that maybe a little more of kind of an orangey and not quite so oversaturated. But again, you get the idea. I can go through all of my various adjustments, maybe my profile-based lens corrections. I could add a vignette. Let's just make it a fairly strong vignette effect. In fact, we'll make this kind of more of a sort of border effect. Push this back into the image a little bit. But again, the point is not the specific adjustments per se, but rather the fact that I've applied a wide variety of adjustments, and so now I can save those adjustments. I can save those settings so that I could use this as the foundation of starting with another image. And so let's just pretend like I've created a wonderful effect here. Obviously, this is a little bit of an overly strong effect, but I can then come over to the left panel here within the Develop module, and this is where I'm able to create a new preset. So first off, on that left panel, we'll look for the presets heading, and over to the right of that, you're going to look for the plus symbol, and then click on that plus and choose the option to create a preset. So I'll click Create Preset, and we'll give this a name. I'm going to call this Silly Sepia with Frame, as in that vignette is sort of forming a framing effect. And I will put that into the default in this case, just as kind of a placeholder for our purposes so that I know exactly where these are and that they're not my real presets, most importantly. So user presets is the default option. You could also choose new group in order to define a brand new group. Think of a group as essentially a folder in which to contain your presets. You can see here I have a handful of groups. Those are reflected over here on the left panel in the presets section. So I have those import presets, creative, utility, and targeted adjustments. And so I could create a new group if I needed it. I could select one of the existing groups. And this, by the way, you can't actually just create a group just sort of randomly, an empty group as it were, in that presets list. You would create the group as part of creating an actual preset. So a little bit of kind of an extra step in some regards in that respect. But I'm just going to use user presets here. And then I can pick and choose. I'm just going to choose the Check All button. I'm going to click Check All at the bottom left, which turns on sort of everything. Don't worry about the specifics of what adjustments are enabled versus not. We'll talk more about that with another situation here. But first, I'm going to just start off by saving essentially all of my adjustments from this image so that I can apply them to another image. And again, we'll go into details of being more selective about that momentarily. So I'll go ahead and click the Create button down at the bottom of the New Develop Preset dialog. So I've given that preset a name. I've decided which group I want to put it in. Again, that's sort of like a folder. I'm including all of the adjustments I create. And so now I have a preset that I can use with other images. So here you'll see my silly sepia with frame preset within that user presets group. And of course, I can now apply that preset to other images. And again, the key benefit here is that it just gives me a really quick starting point, or possibly a quick finishing point if you're really happy with the preset, but I can apply that exact same effect to another image. And so we could take, the overall effect and apply it elsewhere. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to take a little bit of an aside here and demonstrate how we can also update an existing preset. So especially in this case, I made the effect a bit too strong on purpose so that you could more easily see what was going on. But in the real world, I might have then realized, wait, this is too strong. I need to tone it down a little bit. Let me show you how you can also modify an existing preset. You certainly could create a brand new preset, even in some respects a preset based on an existing preset, start with the preset, make some changes, create a brand new preset. But we don't want to have too much clutter when it comes to our presets, at least I don't, and so I'd rather update an existing preset if I feel it wasn't quite perfect. So let's go to another image, and let's start off by talking about applying this preset to another image. And so obviously, well, by virtue of the application of a preset, we're going to be changing the appearance of a photo. But here I'm going to use a different image than I used for the initial preset. I'll apply that same preset to this image, and then we're going to make some changes. So obviously it's a really, really strong effect. And so maybe I want to tone down the vignette effect, for example. Maybe I'll feather that just a little bit more. And more importantly, in this case, I want to go to that color grading and make the color much, much less saturated. So maybe somewhere in there, for example, in that range. And still, perhaps I want that frame. In fact, maybe I'll make the effect for my vignette more feathered and maybe even a little bit more subtle if I want to just kind of tone things down a little bit. So let's assume now that this is what I'm happier with in terms of the actual vignette and the actual sepia tone type of effect. But remember, that was applied using this silly sepia with frame preset. If I then decide that I want to change that preset to match the changes I've just made. So in this context, usually you would start by applying the preset, making changes to the adjustment settings for the image, and then updating the preset. It's not a mandatory requirement, but that's typically what we're trying to accomplish. We're changing the preset. So start by applying the preset to an image, make changes to the adjustment settings, and then update. Well, how do we update the preset? Very easily. If we take a look at my preset here on the presets list, I can right-click and then choose to update with current settings. So I'm updating that existing preset with the new settings that I've updated, that I've modified with this current image. And here again, I have the same dialog, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and keep all of those changes. And so now when I go to apply the preset in the future, I won't get this effect with the Pantheon. I'll get this effect with the Easter Island image. And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind also. I mentioned right from the start that presets are just shortcuts for adjustment settings in the develop module. If I then later go and change a preset, which I've done in this case, the Pantheon image right here, this is what that silly sepia with frame preset looked like when I initially created it, but now I've modified it so that it creates this effect for the Easter Island photo. And so notice that the Pantheon image did not update to reflect the change in the preset. The image is not essentially remembering that the preset is applied and then making changes to the appearance of the image. If I change a preset, it doesn't affect any previous image that I've used that preset for. It only affects the preset as it's applied moving forward. Important thing to keep in mind. And also, you might be wondering, notice as I go from the Pantheon image to the Easter Island image, take a look at my silly sepia with frame preset. A little bit of trivia that maybe will help you win a trivia contest, or maybe not, at some point. If I switch to the Easter Island image, notice that the text, actually now it no longer does because I made a change, but you may have noticed previously that that silly sepia with frame, it was in italics when I was looking at the Easter Island image, and that's because some of the settings did not properly apply to this image. I've changed that by virtue of updating the preset based on this image. But what I wanted to point out there before I made the change is that the reason that there was that change is that the preset had been originally created with a raw capture, and then I was updating it, applying it to a JPEG image, and therefore some of the settings saved within that preset are considered not to be compatible. It's not technically true, but think of, for example, color temperature and tint as being on different scales with a raw capture, well, color temperature in any event, with a raw capture versus a JPEG. So just a little bit of trivia. If you see italics, it technically means the preset is not completely compatible with the current image. It usually is pretty innocuous. It just means that you're working with a JPEG image, for example, when the preset was created with a raw capture. All right, so I've updated that preset, but let's now take a look at another way that we can create presets. And I think of these as additive presets. And so, for example, if we go to an image that we want to work with, I could apply a variety of changes. Let's use a vignette, for example, as an example for this type of situation. So, here I have an image in color, and here I have an image in black and white, and here's an image in black and white, but with a sepia tone color tint applied. What if I just want to add one little thing? And we'll see several examples where you might use this. I usually refer to these as additive presets or as partial presets, meaning they don't include everything. They're just adding perhaps one or two little adjustments. I'm going to use just a single adjustment as my first example, but then I'll give you a scenario where I actually use multiple, not all adjustments, but multiple adjustments as part of this process. So the idea is being able to create a preset that will, at least for our first example, only change one adjustment for an image. And I'll show you, in fact, in the context of working with an image, how this is not changing everything about the photo. So here I have a black and white image, for example. Let's go to the effects, and actually I'm going to use a brightening preset, and we'll make it pretty obvious. In fact, I'll bring it into the image a little bit more, maybe reduce the feathering. And so again, this is creating this sort of white frame effect. I'm not suggesting this is a vignette that you should apply to an image. I just want to have something really obvious so that you can see the specific effect of the preset I'm about to create. An additive preset, as I refer to them, that only includes a small number, maybe even just one adjustment. So I've applied an adjustment as my starting point for creating a preset, and so I'll go back over to the presets heading and click the plus button and choose to create a preset. And when I create an additive preset, I usually like to use some sort of indication that it is only doing one thing. So, I'll make this even more exaggerated. Only bright vignette, for example. I'll keep that in user presets just to kind of isolate these presets that we're creating today. And now I'm going to be selective about which specific adjustments are included as part of this preset. So within the new develop preset dialog, I'm going to click the check none button, and then I will only turn on the options that I actually want. In this case, it's literally one adjustment, my post-crop vignetting that's found in the effects section. That's the only thing that I want this preset to do. So let's go ahead and create that preset. And in fact, I'm going to reset my post-crop vignetting just for this image, just for my own convenience. And now if I go over to my user presets, I can find only bright vignette. So this image does not have a bright vignette. Now I'm applying it just by clicking on the name of the preset. If I go back to this image, for example, this is a full color image. If I now go apply that only bright vignette, I still get the brightening vignette, but I'm not converting the image to black and white as was the case for the image I used as the basis of that preset. I'm only adding, in this case, a single adjustment. Now, of course, it could be more than just a single adjustment. We could apply a variety of adjustments. And for example, that leads me right into the next situation where I tend to use develop presets pretty significantly, pretty substantially, is upon import. So I'm going to show you some ways that we can apply presets. Obviously, the simplest, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you've used any presets at all, is to simply click on a preset in the presets list on the left panel in the develop module, and it applies that preset to the current image. But I'm going to show you a couple of other tricks that are really great in terms of applying presets to other images, to multiple images, more importantly, all at the same time. And so let's consider, for example, on import. I think that's a great time to apply a developed preset. And for me, I use that as a way to apply what I think should be my preferred defaults, essentially. So let me turn off the camera to get that out of the way here so we can take a look. And I'll point out some of the adjustments that I like to include for all images, essentially, right from the start. And so that includes, for example, clarity. I like to give most of my images a little bit of a clarity boost to get some enhancement of contrast and texture. I boost the vibrance. Here it's not available because this is a black and white image, but for my color images, I almost always give that vibrance a bit of a boost, maybe up to about a +20 or so. I would also very often, almost always, include my profile-based lens corrections. So in the lens correction section, I would choose profile, turn on both of these checkboxes, and I would set the pop-up here to auto so that that will be included as part of the preset. I also, under detail for noise reduction, I usually increase the value for smoothness under color noise reduction up to about 80, because if there's any noise in an image, I find raising the smoothness helps significantly in terms of mitigating that noise. And if you tend to like to apply other adjustment effects, you certainly could do that. Maybe you like to apply a vignette to just about every image, or you might convert every image to black and white, or apply a variety of other possible adjustments. The point is, you likely already know that there are certain adjustments over on the right panel in the Develop module that you tend to change for just about every image. And you probably settle on a somewhat similar value. Not going to be the exact same value for every image, but you tend to boost clarity up to about 25 or so for most images, or you tend to boost vibrance up to 20 or so for most images. So whatever those adjustments that you tend to modify from their defaults, those are good options to include in a preset that you would apply at import. So in this particular example, we had applied just a brightening vignette, and I saved a preset that only included those options, that one option, but I could also pick and choose. So if I wanted to create an import preset, I already have mine created, so I don't need to make it right here in front of you, but I might, for example, turn on certainly the clarity adjustment, and I would, well, in this case, we're working with a black and white image, so let's go back to a color image so we can see all of those effects. So vibrance and clarity, and under detail, color noise reduction, and I also turn on chromatic aberration and profile-based corrections. I got the color noise, I turned off the vignette. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? I don't think so. I also might include auto settings. So if you turn on the auto settings checkbox when you're creating a preset, that is essentially the equivalent of clicking the auto button over in the basics section on the right panel in the Develop module. So you could choose whether or not you want to include that. And to be honest, I sort of vacillate on this one. What I would say is that in general, I do apply the auto adjustment for my raw captures, and then I do not apply the auto adjustment for other captures, which for me would mostly mean smartphone captures, or if I were using a little casual point and shoot, or my underwater point and shoot camera, something like that. So I do tend to apply the auto settings for raw captures on import. Just a matter of personal preference. I find it usually gives me a little bit of a better preview, a little better starting point, essentially, for the image. But again, the point is that we can pick and choose within the new Develop preset dialog which specific adjustments we want to include. It could be everything. It could be just one or two adjustments, in this case, a handful of adjustments. For now, I'm just going to click Cancel, though, because I've already created my own preset to apply during import. And so now that we've talked about a variety of ways of creating these presets, let's talk about some of the other options for applying, including applying during import. And so I'll go back to the library module, and I will click the import button at the bottom of the left panel, and that will bring up our import dialog. And so I have some images on an SD card here, and we can adjust our various normal settings, essentially. I won't rename those, and these are, I'm just going to call it Italy. Good at demo images. So I'm just configuring the overall settings for the import. But in our context today for develop presets, the key setting we want to consider is in the apply during import section, the develop settings pop-up, and we can choose from that pop-up any of our presets. And so, for example, I have my import presets with auto versus without auto and various creative. For our purposes today, let's just go ahead. I'm going to choose one of my creative presets, my Tim Gray black and white infrared effect, so that it's more obvious. Usually, I would not apply an infrared effect to every photo that I'm importing at one time, but here I just want it to be really obvious exactly what's going on. And so for me, usually on import, I'm applying a develop preset that just represents settings in the develop module that I prefer to have different from the default settings. It just streamlines the workflow in that regard, but you can have that accomplish virtually anything you'd like. And so if you tend to shoot in black and white, meaning you prefer black and white as your final output, you could convert your images to black and white as part of the import process. And now you've got a starting point where every image is in black and white. So I'm going to do that here just for illustrative purposes, not something I normally do. But in any event, I'll go ahead and click the import button in order to initiate that import. And as these images come in, you'll see I'm getting initially my color images from the raw captures, of course. And as those images are getting updated, you'll see that the develop preset is being applied. And so, for example, here's one of those images that has been converted to black and white for me automatically. So whatever it is that you might want to apply to all of your images during import, whether that's just some minor adjustments from the default settings in the develop module, or something a little more dramatic where you're creating or applying a creative effect essentially to the images, you can do that. So now you'll see all of these images are updating to reflect the conversion to black and white. But again, the key thing to keep in mind is that the presets represent saved settings from the develop module. And so if you decide you don't like it for a particular image or for all the images, you can always make a change. So for example, Lightroom Classic is non-destructive. That includes when you apply a preset during import, we can go over to the right panel. We'll go into the develop module here first, and over on the right panel, we can, for example, simply convert our treatment from black and white back to color, and I have the image back in color. Or I could simply click the reset button down at the bottom of the right panel to reset that image to its default settings or apply whatever other changes I would like. So the point is that we have that flexibility. So we can apply the develop preset during import just to streamline our workflow, give us a better starting point for our images, but that doesn't take away from the flexibility, the creative potential of working with those presets and being able to work in the develop module later and improve upon the image in any way that you would like. Okay, so let's then take a look. Actually, we can stay in the develop module because I have a presets group here, and I'm going to reset this image. So again, just by way of reminding ourselves of the possibilities of repeating the process here, if we're going to apply a preset to a single image, pretty straightforward. And notice, by the way, I'll expand my sections here just so we have more to work with, my individual groups of presets. If we hover our mouse over a preset, we'll see a preview of the effect. And that's not applying the effect, it's just giving us a preview within the image. I can then click in order to actually apply the effect to the current image. So maybe this one I decide I want to go with that black and white infrared effect, for example. Maybe the same thing for, in fact, let me reset this image and go back to infrared. There we go, an infrared effect. And here, by the way, you can see these presets, as I was mentioning earlier, they appear in italics because they were created for a raw capture with adjustments that are sort of considered to be applicable only to raw capture. That would probably most likely relate to the temperature, different scale. I'm sure there's a couple others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but the point is that it's a preset that was created for something else, you might say. So nothing to be alarmed about, just a little bit of trivia as far as I'm concerned. So again, we can take our presets and apply them to individual images at any time during our workflow, but what happens when we want to apply more images after the fact? In fact, let's go back and, let's take, we'll use some images from the Palouse here, for example, and I decide I want to convert some or all of these to black and white, maybe just, again, to use that exaggerated example. And so we can take a look at a group of images. Now, in the develop module, if I wanted to apply the same adjustment to multiple images, I would need to synchronize my settings. And so I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind is there's always more than one way to approach a given task. So if you're familiar with the ability to synchronize adjustments, we can synchronize in real time in the develop module. We can synchronize after the fact in the develop module. We're not going to worry about those types of automation right now because we're focused on presets. And with presets, one of the easiest ways to apply presets to a batch of images is actually not to use the develop module at all. A little bit of a hidden trick, you might say, that we can apply presets to a batch of images in the library module. So I'm going to switch to the library module here, and I'll switch to the grid view. And very important when we're in the library module, if you want to work with multiple images, as a general rule, I recommend being in the grid view display rather than the loop view display. By default, Lightroom assumes if you're in the loop view display that you're working on a single image. So we want to not see a single image here in our general preview area. We want to see our thumbnails, our grid view display. And I could then, for example, select all of the images. So I can go to the edit menu and choose select all, or just use the equivalent keyboard shortcut. And then the key is the quick develop section over here on the right panel. So under quick develop, notice that we have an option for saved preset. And so I can apply a different preset. So let's go into my creative presets and we'll, maybe do the sepia tone effect, for example, just for fun. And so I can apply an individual preset to multiple images all at the same time. And so as the previews get updated here, as the preset gets applied to all of the images that I've currently selected, and as it works to update those previews, so you can see Lightroom catching up with me here. And we'll wait for this preview to update. We're almost there, it's loading, getting that update. There we go. So now we have the preset applied to this image. So again, using the quick develop section in the library module is one of the nice little hidden tricks. Makes it very easy to apply adjustments to multiple images by way of a preset all at once. Nice and quick and easy option. All right, and then we can also, of course, apply these presets in other ways. And so one of those options obviously here is during import, one being during using the library module in that grid view display with the quick develop. And then of course, as I mentioned, in the develop module, you also have the ability to apply individual presets. You could enable, though, the synchronization of develop adjustments across multiple images. And yes, so there was a question here about this auto adjustment. So I mentioned the auto adjustment, and there's a couple things that I'll point out here. The first question was, does it apply an adjustment with clarity? And the answer is yes, it will adjust clarity. Think of it as all of the basic adjustments here. The other odd little behavior with that auto adjustment, if you apply auto during import, that won't give you the exact same result as if you had applied auto later. Notice that once I've applied auto, I can't apply it again. If I applied the auto settings during import, I'm still able to apply auto again to refresh it, essentially, to, let's think of that as, I guess, the final setting. So a little bit of confusion in that regard. And yeah, so a question about applying the preset. So again, just to clarify, if I'm applying the preset to multiple images in the library module using quick develop, there I would just go into the grid view display within the library view, select all of the images or whichever images I actually want to apply the effect to, and then over on the right panel, quick develop section, just choose the appropriate saved preset. So if I want to go into a cyanotype effect, for example, I can apply that to all of these 142 images. And so that will take care of that as well. So that's not the sync settings button. That's specific to adjusting the image, adjusting the settings via synchronization. And again, as I mentioned, there's also the synchronization here within the develop module. So we're not going to go into detail on that, just pointing out that that is another option. In any context of any adjustment, you can always apply synchronized adjustments in the develop module by synchronizing the adjustments. And that would include if you applied a preset, but it also more broadly would just mean I can have automatic synchronization enabled, for example, and just apply changes to the right panel, and those changes will affect all of the selected images. All right, so we've seen how we can create presets for various purposes and a few ways that we can apply those developed presets for our images. But let's also talk about managing the presets, because I find a lot of photographers end up with a lot of presets. As I mentioned at the beginning, you can add my presets. So the presets, the 4 groups that you see here, those are available if you'd like them. If you're already a GreyLearning Ultimate Bundle subscriber, or if you have the Mastering Lightroom Classic bundle that's included in GreyLearning, then you already have access to the presets there, but you can also purchase them if you'd like. But I'm sure you found other presets. Maybe you've created your own presets. You might have purchased or otherwise acquired presets from others. Maybe another photographer has shared their presets with you, which is a possibility we'll take a look at a little bit later as well. The point is, with a lot of presets, things can get a bit confusing. And in fact, here you can get a sense of that. There's so many presets that I have here that trying to make sense of which preset I should apply in which situation, and kind of keeping things straight can be a little bit confusing. And so I want to share a variety of ways that you can help manage those presets. So let's take a look at some of those options here. Again, within the develop module, the presets list over on the left panel, we can make some changes. And so we'll just apply some of these randomly to these various presets. But for example, if I want to rename, maybe I don't want to put the word silly in my preset name, so I might want to rename it to something less silly. I can right-click on a preset within the list here and choose rename. That will bring up a dialog where I could put in another name. Maybe I'll take away the silly piece of the sepia and click OK, so that now that preset has been renamed. We can also, kind of handy, cool, I think, feature is identify certain presets as favorites. So notice I have a favorites group up at the top of my preset section. I didn't actually create that favorites group. It was created for me automatically when I favorited a preset. And so let's say, for example, that you really like, maybe the infrared effect. Then you might want to add this to favorites. So I can right-click on a preset and choose Add to Favorites from the list. And so notice at the moment, favorites only includes my Tim Gray import preset. If I add this TGBW cyanotype preset to favorites, it shows up on that list as well. It just gives me quick access. The favorites, you'll see they're marked by a star on the icon for the preset. And of course, they're listed in this favorites preset. You could unfavorite by right-clicking and choosing Remove from Favorites. And if you remove the favorite status from all of your presets, then that favorites preset group will disappear as well. So it's only there when you've actually put that feature to use. See the question here, is there a setting for infrared? No, there is not. And so, which I suppose would beg the follow-up question then, well, you've got this infrared effect. How is it that you're applying that infrared effect to the image? And that would be a simple matter of the black and white mix. And so I'm going to turn off black and white mix. And you see if I simply convert the image, so let me turn off the camera here so you're not having anything blocked. If my treatment is simply set to black and white, I just have a grayscale version of the image. But I could also change the black and white mix, and that's what I've done with this particular effect. For an infrared effect, it essentially means boost the yellows and the greens, make the yellows and the greens brighter, and the blues, and I also use the aquas, darker. So the idea is we get a dark sky and bright foliage. It's kind of the classic trademark, classic sign of an infrared effect. And so again, a really good example of, instead of trying to remember what sort of settings work well in most cases for an infrared type of effect, maybe you could just simply use a preset for that basis. So just click a preset that then boosts the yellows and the greens and darkens the blues and the aquas, and that'll give you a good starting point. And my preset, by the way, for infrared also includes a boost of clarity and texture, a vignette. You might like to add film grain as well. But the point is, once again, the preset is just saved settings from over on the right side. And so having the preset available is really primarily a matter of convenience. All right, so I mentioned the groups. So we create a group as part of the process of creating a preset. So I'll just create a new preset called New Preset. And so now as part of this process, I can create a new group. So I'll choose New Group from the group pop-up. I'll just call this New Group, and we'll just check all, why not, and click Create. So now I have a new group right down here with a new preset included. And so that's the way that we would create a group or a folder of sorts for our presets, is as part of the process of actually creating the preset itself. But we also can drag and drop. For example, we can move our presets around. We can reorganize those presets essentially. And there's a couple of ways we can actually move them. So for example, let's say user presets, it's a little sort of nondescript, and I want my new group to be the place where I'm saving these other presets. Well, I could actually just drag and drop. I can drag a preset down into a new group. Now the presets within the group will be alphabetized, so it doesn't really matter what order. You just want to drag them into the group itself. So it can be the group or down right below the group, and you'll see those then get sorted. I could also rename the group. I can right click and rename the group. And what are we going to call these? Other effects, because I don't have any idea what I would really call this group necessarily, since it's just for demo. And I'll rename this new preset to Mystery Preset, for example. So again, I could move things around just by dragging and dropping. Another helpful little trick, let's say, well, the CPU with frame, let's say that I want to move that to a different location, but I'm not so good with the drag and drop. Well, instead of using a drag and drop, I can actually right click and move. So let's go with our sepia with frame effect. I can right click and choose move from the pop-up, and then choose which group. So let's put that in creative presets, for example. So choose the group, click OK, and you'll see that my sepia with frame is now added to that group. I obviously could right click and move, or I could drag and drop. So whichever approach you prefer for moving those presets around is obviously perfectly fine. But wait, there's more. And so we'll actually, while we're talking about these presets, the mystery preset, which doesn't really do much of anything at all, or I don't need it, I just created it to demonstrate a process here. If I decide I don't need a preset, there's some presets that I'm simply not using, I can right click on a preset and choose delete to get rid of the preset. So this is permanently deleting the preset. You can't undo it. Fortunately, you might have a backup somewhere depending on where you've gotten your presets. But in any event, I can just confirm that I want to delete the preset altogether if I decide that I just don't need it, or I created it by accident or as part of a silly presentation trying to entertain my friends. And so we can always delete those presets if we'd like. But there's also another option for managing presets. It's not super full-featured, but it is helpful in terms of removing some clutter from time to time from the presets that are listed. So again, to the right of the presets heading, I'll click that plus button, which is where we can create presets. And I'm going to choose Manage Presets. And here, I'll get a list of all of the preset groups, and I can turn them off or on. And so, for example, I don't tend to do much in the way of portrait photography. I might turn off the checkboxes for these portrait options so that I don't have to be distracted by them when I don't think I'm likely to use them. And so I could go through and pick and choose. Notice there are these classic options. These are presets that used to be included in Lightroom Classic, and they seemingly are not included in Lightroom Classic anymore. They've been replaced by updated presets, but actually you could just turn on these checkboxes. If you miss some of the old classic effects, you could turn on the checkboxes. In fact, I'll turn on the classic black and white just for the sake of seeing that reappear. So now I've re-enabled a group of presets that had been hidden and I've turned off. So these portrait options over on the left side are going to disappear and the classic black and white is going to reappear. I'll click save, and sure enough, notice that those sections of portraits have disappeared, and there's my classic B&W or black and white filter has reappeared with those old school effects from Lightroom Classic. And again, we obviously could go back and change. So I hid those portrait presets. I'll go back to manage presets. And then I am actually doing a portrait shoot for whatever reason. And so now I actually could use those presets. Perhaps I could go turn those back on, or if I don't feel that I really need those old classics, I can make those changes. So you could have different groups of presets, some of which you hide from time to time. So, you know, group A is visible right now and group B and C are hidden, but then you decide you need group B. So you re-enable those. So you can bring presets back and forth just to kind of streamline your list of presets. Yeah, so good couple of questions here. So Sam says, if I create my own presets, how would I or should I back them up? And if you're backing up your computer, then they're probably already being backed up. If you're not sure where those presets are, by the way, if you wanted to see where those presets are, any of the presets on your list, you can right-click, and for Macintosh users, that would be Show in Finder. On Windows, that would be Show in Explorer. And that will bring up a window in your operating system where you'll see where the actual preset files are stored. And you can see here, it's on my hard drive under Users, My Name, Library, Application Support, Adobe Camera Raw, Imported Settings, and then the group name for my presets. So right here would be the presets that I have created or imported into Lightroom Classic, as the case may be. So this is just a location on my hard drive that's being backed up. In my case, I'm on a Macintosh, so I use Time Machine to back up my internal hard drive. But you could certainly copy these to another location, which actually brings us to another helpful possibility. In fact, I'm going to leave this set to the Downloads folder. And well, there's a few examples where you might want to, in Sam's case, back up the presets, or actually we might want to copy presets to another computer. You might want to share them with a friend, or whatever the case might be. Well, we can export the presets and actually then re-import them. And so here, for example, I could select my individual groups that I want to export. So here I have an import presets group and creative presets. I can right-click on a group and then choose to export the group. I could also export individual presets, but to me that starts to get a little more cumbersome. Usually I would export individual groups. So you might organize your presets into groups and clean up those groups based on the techniques that I've shown you here. But then you can also export the groups overall. And so I right-click Export Group, and we will navigate to the Downloads folder, and I'll leave it with its default name, so I'll save there. And we'll go to the group number 2, the creative presets, export that group, put that in the same place, and export the utility presets, and export the targeted adjustment effects. And so that creates, let's bring back that Finder window, that creates these zip files that contain those XMP files that are the actual way that the presets are stored. So I could copy these to another computer, I could email these to a friend, I could put them into a course on the GreyLearning website so that those of you that have signed up for one of the bundles will have access to those presets at no additional charge. I can make them obviously available for sale as well. And so these presets then are available to import. So now pretend that we're magically switching to a different computer. Now, I've been working on my desktop, now I'm switching to my laptop, or I was working on my computer, now I'm working on a friend's computer. I can go back up into the presets section of the left panel in the develop module, and I can import presets. And so I could go in and then just select all of these groups all at once. And so this, by the way, if you access my presets through GreyLearning, this is the exact process you'll use. Import the presets, select all of them that you've downloaded from the site, and then click the import button. At the moment, I obviously don't need to do that because I have all of my presets over here on the left panel already. But this is the process that you could use if you, in fact, wanted to make those presets available somewhere else. So whether you're backing up your presets just for safety, or transferring them to another of your computers, giving them to a friend, or skipping the export part, you could simply acquire presets from someone else and then import those into Lightroom Classic. And yeah, there was a request here to see. So another way to not have to pay for your presets is to find out what the settings were for existing presets so that you can just put those to use creating your own preset based on that. But the question here, William asking for the black and white mix settings for infrared. So here once again, these are the settings that I typically use. Keep in mind, just a starting point. So here, for example, with this image, that has infrared good, and with this image, also with the infrared, are those the same too? Yes. So if I just select these two images, this image versus this image, the exact same preset had been applied to. Oh, actually, I just realized I've got my camera covering up part of the settings there for the black and white mix. So I'll turn that off for the moment so you can take a look at those. So this image versus this image, exact same settings in black and white mix, but you can see a rather dramatic effect. So a preset is not going to just automatically give you a perfect effect for every single image. You need to take into account the specific color values within the image, for example. So here, if we go back into the color interpretation, the blues in the sky, not really all that blue, whereas for this image, the blues in the sky, really, really blue. And so this image is going to respond more strongly to a darkening of the aquas and the blues, and actually responds better as well with the foliage, the yellows and the greens. So this isn't going to give you a perfect solution for every single image, obviously, but it can give you a really good starting point. And that'll vary depending on the nature of the adjustment that we're talking about. So with the black and white mix, it might be a little bit more specific to a particular image, whereas with some of the more general adjustments, a vignette effect is going to be a little more uniform, generally speaking, unless the image has extreme contrast, for example. All right. Yeah, so Richard's question about the profile. So if we go into lens corrections, there we set the setup to auto just so that we're not locking in a specific setting. And with the set to auto, then the image will be evaluated. And so, for example, this is the 10 to 24. Let's go ahead and apply my import preset to this image. And you'll see that the profile is for the 10 to 24 lens. And well, I'm sure this would have not been the 10 to 24 lens. So let's apply my import preset, and you can see that there the profile is applied for the 18 to 400. So it's just to ensure that we get the correct profile applied automatically based on the metadata for the image, and of course assuming that there is a profile for the particular lens that you were using. So yeah, good question, Sam. If you apply a preset, yes, the most recent preset will show up on the saved preset, but of course that's not always a complete indication of what you've done to an image. And so, for example, if I switch to this image here, you'll see that in the quick develop section in the library module, the saved preset option, you can see that reference to cyanotype versus here it was the import preset. And did I change out? This one I think was sepia. No, this was just custom settings. So I had made some changes apparently after. And so it's only going to be the most recently applied preset. So it doesn't really give you a full history other than going into the history. And there it doesn't give you a super clear sense of what's included in the preset. Technically, you saw that the presets are actually XMP files. And so let's go see this one in Finder, for example. It's right over here. And let's open this with, it should let me open this with text edit. There we are. The XMP file you can open with word processor of sorts, but as you can see here, not going to be real easy to dissect. It can be dissected. If you take a look in this section here, for example, so it's old school, referred to as split toning, but some of these numbers related to the various settings. And so the hue, for example, what do we have? The hue of 214 with a saturation of 13. So you could parse the information not necessarily the easiest thing to do necessarily. And yes, of course, the perpetual question, will this presentation be recorded? I love when we get that question during the live presentation because it suggests to me that everyone was so happy. Actually, maybe I should take it to mean that I was talking too fast, but I like to think that it also means that you're really happy with the information that was presented. And so I'm going to go with that assumption. But yes, the recording will be available. I will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the presentation so that you'll get a link to the recording. And it'll actually be the same link as you followed to get to the live presentation as well. That does become the permanent link for the presentation. But we will send a follow-up email with those details out so that you can get access to the recording. And then just as a quick reminder, again, if you already have the GreyLearning Ultimate Bundle or if you have the Mastering Lightroom Classic Bundle, then you already have access to this brand new, by the way. It's a course in GreyLearning, but it just has downloads with instructions for these developed presets that I demonstrated today. So you could point your web browser to timgrey.me/presets. And again, if you're already a GreyLearning subscriber, then I'm sure you're aware of being able to sign in and going to the My Dashboard page so that you can see all of the courses that you're enrolled in. This Develop Presets for Lightroom Classic course will be one of those, but you can also point your web browser here, make sure you're signed in, and then resume course. And if you're not already a GreyLearning Ultimate Bundle subscriber, or if you just want to learn about Lightroom Classic, there's a variety of courses and bundles that we have available. If you just want to learn Lightroom Classic, I would recommend our Mastering Lightroom Classic bundle of courses, and that can be found at timgrey.me/LR-bundle. But in the meantime, again, thank you all so much for joining me for today's webinar presentation. I really appreciate you joining me for the presentation live. I appreciate the interaction. I appreciate all the comments and the questions, and especially because we've got folks from not only all over the US, but some locations around the world as well. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll hope to see you again soon for another presentation, live online presentation as part of the GreyLearning Live webinar series. Until then, thanks very much.